Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. Today, we're doing something kind of crazy. We're going to tell the story of the entire Bible. I guess, not as a list of verses or a history lecture, but as one big, human story, full of wonder, heartbreak, betrayal, and hope. A story that begins before there was even time, before the first heartbeat, before the first sunrise. Imagine this, darkness, not the kind that scares you at night, but a deep, endless silence where nothing exists, no sound, no stars, no shape. And then, a voice. No one knows exactly how it sounded, but with just a few words, "Let there be light." Everything changed. Light exploded across the emptiness. The universe took its first breath. From that moment, the story of the Bible begins, not with people, but with purpose. God speaks, and galaxies form. Oceans find their edges. Mountains rise, and life begins to move, crawl, swim, and fly. And in the middle of it all, a garden, beautiful, quiet, perfect. A place called Eden. Here, the first humans open their eyes. Adam and Eve. They walk with God, talk with Him, and live in a world without fear or pain. Imagine that. No jealousy, no hunger, no death. Just harmony. The world as it was meant to be. But perfection, as it turns out, is fragile. Somewhere, in the unseen corners of creation, something stirs. A whisper questions everything. Did God really say that? It sounds harmless at first, just curiosity. But that whisper becomes the seed of doubt, and doubt spreads faster than fire. In one moment of choice, one bite of fruit, the story shifts forever. The garden falls silent. The laughter fades. Something inside humanity breaks, something that can't be fixed by simply saying sorry. And from that day, the world starts to unravel. Brothers turn against brothers. Kingdoms rise and crumble. People build towers to reach heaven and end up scattering across the earth. Yet even then, God doesn't walk away. He begins a new story through one man named Abraham. A promise, a nation, a future, a light that will somehow find its way back into the darkness. But for now, the question remains, how do you fix a world that chose to fall apart? That's where our story begins. A world that should be perfect, but isn't. A God who refuses to give up. And a people who keep running, even when they don't know why. The story of the entire Bible, creation, rebellion, redemption, and hope, is about to unfold. But first, we need to understand what was really lost in that garden, and why the rest of human history keeps trying to get it back. And maybe, just maybe, by the end of this story, we'll see how everything, from the first light to the final word, was leading somewhere all along. So, let's pick up right where we left off, the moment after everything changed. The garden that once overflowed with life now feels different. The air is heavy, the trees are quiet, and the two people who once walked with God now hide among the leaves, afraid. For the first time ever, fear exists. Shame exists. It's like the light that once wrapped around them has faded, and they can feel the weight of what they've done. It's strange. One choice, one act of disobedience, and suddenly everything that was whole begins to crack. The ground, the sky, even their hearts seem different. And yet, instead of turning away completely, God does something unexpected. He searches for them. He calls out their names. It's not anger that fills his voice, but sadness, like a parent who knows what's been lost. This moment sets the tone for the rest of the Bible. People run, and God keeps reaching. From here, the story begins to widen. Adam and Eve leave the garden, stepping into a world that's wild and untamed. They start a family, and their children grow, but even then, the shadow of that first choice lingers. Jealousy creeps in, and soon, one brother's anger turns into something darker. It's shocking how quickly love can twist into hate. The first human story outside the garden ends in tragedy, and it's clear, something deep inside humanity has broken. But the story doesn't stop there. As generations pass, people spread across the earth. They build cities, invent languages, and fill the world with noise and ambition. Yet underneath it all is the same ache, the desire to be more, to be in control, to be like gods themselves. The Tower of Babel rises from that hunger, a monument to human pride. And just like before, it all falls apart. It seems like the world keeps repeating the same mistake, reaching higher but falling harder each time. Still, through all the chaos, there's a quiet thread running through the story. God hasn't given up. He watches, he waits, and he chooses. Somewhere among the countless faces and nations, one man is called out of the crowd, not because he's perfect, but because he's willing to listen. And with that man, a new promise begins to take shape, a promise that might just change everything. But for now, the world still waits in the shadow of that first broken choice, wondering if light will ever return. The man's name is Abraham. He's old, quiet, and settled into a life that seems predictable. Then one day, out of nowhere, God speaks to him. The message is simple but impossible. Leave everything you know, your home, your land, your people, and go to a place I'll show you. No map, no details, just a promise. God says he'll make Abraham's descendants into a great nation, one that will bless the entire world. It's an unbelievable idea for a man with no children and no plan. Yet somehow, Abraham believes. That faith becomes the spark for everything that comes next. But as the story unfolds, it's clear that faith doesn't erase struggle. Abraham waits years for that promise to make sense. He and his wife Sarah grow older, watching time slip away while holding on to hope that often feels impossible. Their journey is filled with silence and questions, and sometimes they make choices that show just how hard it is to trust when nothing seems to happen. Still, through every failure and every moment of doubt, that promise doesn't disappear. It lingers like a faint light on the horizon, reminding them that something bigger is still at work. Meanwhile, the world around them grows darker. Kingdoms rise and fall, people chase after power, and violence fills the earth again. The same brokenness that began in the garden still runs through every human heart. But even in the middle of all that chaos, one truth keeps echoing. God hasn't forgotten his word. He's building something quietly, piece by piece, through imperfect people who barely understand what he's doing. And somewhere out there, beyond the deserts and the silence, the next chapter is already waiting. A family that will grow into a nation, and a promise that will be tested in ways no one can imagine. Generations pass, and Abraham's family becomes a nation, Israel. What began as one man's quiet faith turns into a people chosen to carry the promise of light into a dark world. But that light flickers constantly. They face famine, slavery, war, and betrayal. The promise feels distant, almost forgotten. In Egypt, they're trapped for centuries under the weight of oppression, crying out for help. And then, out of the wilderness, a man named Moses rises. He's not powerful, not confident, but somehow he's chosen to lead. With nothing but a staff in his hand and faith in his heart, he faces the mightiest empire on earth. The story tightens with every step, the plagues, the night of escape, the chase through the desert, the sea splitting open in front of them. It's breathtaking, terrifying, and filled with mystery. Freedom finally seems possible, but even on the other side of the Red Sea, the people begin to question everything. They grumble, they doubt, they forget. The same conflict that began in the garden, trust versus fear, obedience versus pride, still burns inside them. Then comes the mountain. Thunder, fire, and a voice that shakes the earth. God gives them a law, a way to live, a way to be different. For a moment, it feels like the world might finally find balance again. But even as the commandments are being written, down below, the people are already breaking them. They build idols, turning to the very things that cannot save them. The tension rises like a storm that refuses to break. By now, the promise feels fragile, hanging by a thread. The people wander, lost between what they were and what they're meant to be, standing on the edge of destiny, yet still unsure if they can ever truly be free. Years pass in the wilderness, and the people who once walked through parted seas begin to fade into memory. Their children grow up under the open sky, hearing stories about a land that flows with milk and honey, a land they've never seen. But when they finally reach its borders, the fear that haunted their parents still lingers. The promised land isn't empty. It's filled with cities, armies, and giants. The same doubt returns. Can they really trust the God who led them this far? They step forward anyway, led by Joshua, a man who's learned to listen when the world grows loud. Walls fall, rivers part again, and for a moment, it feels like hope has finally found its place. But peace doesn't last long. Once the land is theirs, the people start to forget who brought them there. They trade faith for comfort and purpose for pride. They demand kings, wanting to be like everyone else. And that's where everything begins to unravel again. The kings rise: Saul, David, Solomon, each one carrying the weight of power and the flaws that come with it. David's heart burns for God but breaks his own kingdom with one mistake. Solomon builds a temple so grand it glows in the sun, yet his wisdom fades into greed and distraction. The nation starts to divide, north and south, brother against brother, each one drifting further from the promise they were meant to live out. Then comes the twist no one expects. The kingdom that once stood as a symbol of divine favor begins to crumble. Foreign empires sweep in: Babylon, Assyria, dragging the people away from their home, away from everything familiar. The temple falls. The city burns. The chosen nation becomes scattered across the world, their songs turning into laments. It feels like the end of the story, like the light that once sparked in Eden has finally gone out. But in the middle of that ruin, a few voices still rise. Prophets, men and women who refuse to give up, who speak of a coming king, not like the ones who failed before, but one who will restore everything broken. The promise isn't gone. It's hidden, waiting in the silence. And as centuries pass, the world holds its breath, wondering if the light will ever return. Centuries pass, and the silence stretches long enough for people to wonder if the promise was ever real. Empires rise and fall, prophets fade into memory, and hope becomes something whispered instead of spoken. Then, quietly, in a small, forgotten town called Bethlehem, a child is born. No fanfare, no royal palace, just a baby in a manger. The story that began in a garden now shifts to a stable. The world doesn't realize it yet, but something eternal has just entered time. This child grows up not as a king on a throne, but as a carpenter's son. His name is Jesus. He walks dusty roads, eats with outcasts, and speaks to the poor like they matter more than gold. He heals the sick, touches the untouchable, and tells stories that sound too good to be true. Stories about forgiveness, mercy, and a kingdom that doesn't look like any kingdom people have seen before. The world has never met someone like him. Some see hope in his eyes, others see a threat. The tension builds again, and this time, it feels final. The leaders of the time can't ignore him anymore. Crowds follow wherever he goes, hanging on every word. But power doesn't like to be challenged, and fear always finds a way to twist the truth. The same world he came to save turns against him. He's betrayed, arrested, and condemned. The promise that once burned so bright seems to die as he's nailed to a cross. For a moment, it looks like darkness wins again. The light fades. The story feels over. But then comes the twist no one saw coming. 3 days later, the silence breaks. The tomb that held him is empty. The one who was dead is alive again. The story of the entire Bible folds into this one moment. The Creator stepping into creation to fix what was broken long ago. The curse from the garden finally begins to unravel. Yet even now, the story isn't finished. The promise continues, spreading through those who believe, reaching across generations. The light that returned doesn't fade. It moves, it grows, and it waits for a final ending that the world still hasn't seen. After that moment, everything begins to change. The story that started in a garden and seemed to end on a cross now spreads across the world like a spark carried by the wind. The followers of Jesus, ordinary people, once afraid and unsure, begin to speak with courage they never had before. They tell everyone they meet that hope is alive again. The message travels from small towns to great cities, from quiet homes to royal courts. The same God who once walked with Adam and Eve now walks with humanity through his Spirit, not bound to temples or mountains, but living in people's hearts. It's not a story about rules anymore. It's about relationship. It's not about perfection, but redemption. Every failure, every fall, every shadow that filled the pages before now finds its meaning here. The broken world is slowly being healed, not by force, but by love that refuses to die. And just like the beginning, light pushes back the darkness. One life, one act of kindness, one moment of forgiveness at a time. But the story of the Bible doesn't end with a full stop. It ends with a promise. One final vision of a world made new again. A place where there are no tears, no pain, no death. a garden restored. The same perfection that was lost in Eden returns, not as a memory, but as a future waiting to happen. Creation, once broken, finally comes home. And maybe that's the point of the entire story, not just ancient history, but a mirror for us. It's about the human struggle to believe that even in the darkest places, light can still win. It's about how God never gave up, and how he still hasn't. Every chapter, every name, every moment leads to this one truth: love always had a plan. So, if you ever wondered what the Bible is really about, it's not just laws, wars, or miracles. It's a love story that stretches from the beginning of time to the very end, one that keeps inviting us to step inside. And maybe, just maybe, our own story is still part of it, still unfolding, still unfinished, still reaching toward that final light.